Why are there so many shows starring Muppets and dozens of movies too? They said they'd watch everyone and they mean it. It's something that they've got to do. So now they've pledged you a lifelong commitment. The Muppets, Matthew and Sam.
Welcome to Commitment, the podcast where two friends have vowed to watch all things Muppets. I'm Matthew Gatos.
And I'm Sam Schultz.
And this week we watched The Muppet Show, Sex and Violence from 1975, one of the original pilots for The Muppet Show. You can't find this one anywhere online to watch, so if you want to check it out, you have to own The Muppet Show Season 1 DVD set, and this is a bonus feature on the last disc in that set. So
Is that expensive now?
I don't think so, actually. I think you can find
Okay.
it on eBay for like $20, and maybe it's even sold on Amazon. I don't really know. But yeah, that's the only place you can watch this as of right now. And we also watched a couple of Electric Company appearances of the Sesame Street Muppets and another appearance of Jim Henson on The Tonight Show to promote Muppet Show, Sex and Violence.
And now we're just going to have a perfectly normal conversation about those things we watched, right, Matt?
Exactly. We're just going to dive in, have a normal episode. Nothing strange about this one. I don't know why that man's name is in the title of the episode. It's weird. But no, obviously, we have a guest today. It is Mr. Brian J. Jones, the writer of the Jim Henson biography. He is also the New York Times bestselling biographer of books about Washington Irving, George Lucas, Dr. Seuss. But obviously the one that we're focused on today is the Jim Henson biography, the one we have referenced many a time on this podcast. We will always tell you to go check that out and read it. It's great, and it gives you so much more backstory than we can ever get to on this podcast. And that book was not only a New York Times bestseller, but it was also chosen as the best biography of 2013 by Goodreads, as well as one of the top 10 books of the year by CNN viewers that year. And obviously, you might be able to tell by looking at your little podcatcher there in your hands that this episode's longer than our average episode. And that's because we had Brian J. Jones on, and we had to ask him all of the questions we'd ever want to ask him, not only about The Muppet Show, Sex and Violence, but also just about the Muppets in general, about the experience of writing his book.
And he was extremely generous with his time, and it was great.
Absolutely. And yeah, we hope you enjoy this conversation with Brian J. Jones. And yeah, Sam, why don't you go ahead and tell us what we watched this week?
We watched a few things this week, but the main thing we watched, which I will talk about first, was The Muppet Show, Sex and Violence, which was the second pilot for a proposed weekly Muppet TV show and aired in March of 1975. And this one, to me, was sort of hard to summarize, so I'll do my best. The Muppets all hang out in just some kind of weird room, a waiting room maybe, or a green room, and they put on shows for some reason. They go through some door, and they're just somewhere where they're putting on a show. Nigel, who you may recognize as the eventual conductor of the Muppet Show Orchestra, is their manager, or something like that. And in this special, he mostly hangs out in that weird room with Sam Eagle and Floyd as they're waiting for the 7 Deadly Sins to show up, at which point they will put on the 7 Deadly Sins pageant. So in the meantime, we get acquainted with various freaks and weirdos that we will come to know and love, such as all of the Electric Mayhem making their first appearance here, Statler and Waldorf also making their first appearance here, the Swedish Chef, and many others that we will basically never see again, like Brewster, who was like a lecherous old man in the Valentine's special, but now is sort of a weird guru type of guy with a mildly offensive accent who sits in like a hole in the wall and gives them advice and stuff. And in between the main storyline, which consists of Sam and Nigel playing board games in this room and the 7 Deadly Sins showing up one by one, we get these little skits, kind of like we're going to get on the Muppet Show. Just for completeness sake, I will list the skits. They are Mount Rushmore telling jokes to each other, At the Dance, which is basically the same as the At the Dance that we will get in the Muppet Show, a wrestling match between two increasingly twisted up wrestlers, the Swedish Chef slowly making a sandwich, the Electric Mayhem plays, I think, 2 entire songs. I feel like I dreamt that they played 2 songs. They only
play one.
song.
They only play the Love You to Death one about blowing up.
And in fact, there were more songs in the original version, and Jim went back and removed some.
Oh.
See, that's why we got you here,
Interesting.
Brian, for all this secret inside info.
Yeah. Also, some a kind of cool skit where some loser birds are trying to flirt with some babes and doing a bad job. The theater of things, wherein ordinary objects, in this case pencils and rulers, are used as puppets. Some weird nonsense thing where like nerd monsters get beat up by a couple bully monsters, and Return to Beneath the Planet of the Pigs, which is simultaneously a parody of Gene Shalit and the Planet of the Apes, except in this case the apes are pigs. And then after all that, all the 7 deadly sins are there, except Sloth, who shows up a little bit late. Nigel brings them out on stage, but immediately announces that they've run out of time. And then as everybody starts to like freak out and run around, the camera pans out, the end music plays, and you see all of the Muppeteers running around going wild below the puppets. And that's not the greatest summary because it leaves out kind of a key detail that makes this special particularly hard to summarize, and that a few of the skits are chopped up into like seconds of footage. So you'll see the Swedish chef for a moment as he's making a sandwich, and then a couple seconds later it'll switch over and we'll be checking in on like part 4 of this weird wrestling match skit, and then it zips over to At the Dance where there will be like one single joke, and then it'll go back to some other skit. So it's all very disjointed and weird, and Nigel even calls this out at one point and says that the viewers will get used to the fast pace. I didn't particularly get used to it and thought it was quite strange. Then we also watched 2 Sesame Street and Electric Company crossovers, one in which the Electric Company's resident asshole, J. Arthur Crank, sings a duet with Sesame Street's resident asshole, Oscar the Grouch, about how fun it is to be a horrible person. And I liked that one a lot. And the other one was a quick sketch where Grover is lost and wanders into Vi's diner, and she and Mr. Crank help Grover remember where he lives, which I really also liked. And highlights, like, my favorite thing about Grover is that he's completely phony and a complete ingrate in the best way possible, and just lives like in the exact millisecond and doesn't ever think about his actions or anything like that. And then finally we watched an appearance by Jim on the Johnny Carson show, where he brought along Dr. Teeth and Kermit to promote sex and violence. And most notable is that Kermit is extremely crabby because he only has one line in the special, and he took that very personally. And that was it, I think, right?
Yeah, that's all we watched. I know that they, during this time, were also on the Mike Douglas show, again, which we haven't seen Mike Douglas in a while on this podcast, but I also could not find that clip anywhere on the internet, so we have to just trust that that happened. The Muppet Wiki says that Dr. Teeth and Kermit were there, so I guess that would be Dr. Teeth's first appearance on television, if there was any evidence of that anywhere else outside of just like that one line of text. Could not find that. And then there's also in March there was the Grover Monster Gene Marsh cartoon special.
Whoa, that sounds great.
Well, it basically just seemed like it was a cartoon special that was aired on PBS stations, which was basically Gene Marsh with Grover hosted a collection of the best animation from Sesame Street and the Electric Company. So it was these already established cartoons, and they were just like doing like little intros and outros for them. But yeah, we got you here, Brian. We suckered you in to talk to us about the Muppets today. And mostly I was very curious just to sort of hear your feelings on this time period specifically, sort of pre-SNL, pre-Muppet Show. Jim Henson's trying real hard to make a TV show happen. And if anyone's going to have insight into sort of what was going on with the Henson Company at that time, I think it's you, sir. You've done all the research.
So this comes after, one of the most creatively interesting phases in Jim's career, which is the 60s. Like the 60s is it's one of my favorite periods in Jim's career because he doesn't know Sesame Street is coming along in 1968, 69, and that's sort of the exclamation point at the end of the 60s. So he's got all sorts of really interesting, cool balls in the air throughout the 60s, a lot of stuff which doesn't even involve Muppets. And he's got weird projects like the nightclub.
Right.
He's got really interesting ideas like that. He's doing opening credits for shows, again, stuff that doesn't have money. He's got Timepiece going on. He's got Youth 68. So many really cool, interesting projects. And of course, he's still got the Muppets, and he's still paying his bills with a lot of the ad work. So there's a whole lot going on in the 60s And his career at that point, I think, can go any direction at that point. He doesn't really know what he's going to do. And I always point to his ad in the newspapers at that time, which, was promoting the company. And the Muppets is the last thing on that long list of things they do. So Sesame Street is what happens to him at the end of the 60s. That kind of moves him forward in the Muppets direction. So he's now sort of the Muppet guy. And he's trying very hard to break away from just being the children's puppet guy. He keeps insisting he's family entertainment. So once we get into the early 70s, he's kind of trying to, explicitly state for the public that he's not just the Sesame Street Muppet guy, that Muppets are for families and they're for family entertainment, which is one of the reasons why I think he's so delighted and really fought for that title, Sex and Violence, for this particular pilot. So when we get into the early part of the 70s, and again, the other thing that people need to remember is that this is even pre-Saturday Night Live. So we're in that very specific niche right there in the early 70s when Jim is trying to do, again, a lot of things to bring puppetry into the mainstream. He'd been working for a long time on a live action Broadway show, for example, where the puppeteers would be on stage, and he actually has written lyrics for these things. He got really far along in this process. Nothing ever really comes of that. And he's actually been working with Marshall Brickman on that, in fact, who we will talk about a little bit for Muppet Sex and Violence. But so Jim's this is sort of the really aspirational phase of his career while he's really working hard to get the Muppets out there doing a lot of different things. And again, trying to resist that pigeonholing that people want to do, because he's not just the puppeteer, he's the children's puppeteer. So he's trying to do a lot of different things right now. But one of the big items on his punch list is to get that Muppet Show on the air, whatever form that's going to look like right now. And again, proposals for the Muppet Show are in the archives dating back to the mid 60s. So it's something that Jim really wanted to get done. He knew that they would work on TV. They'd been spending a lot of times on other people's shows, but Jim knows that they'll work. And what's going on again in the early 70s makes it so interesting is he knows they're going to work. He's not quite sure how to stick that landing. And there's various issues with the presentations, for example, on these shows. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that Sex and Violence, for example, does right, but some of the things that they do wrong that Jim finally figured out by the time he gets to what we now know as the Muppet Show. So again, this is an exciting period in his life. It's not quite the creative explosion he's got in the 60s, because he's kind of figured out his thing now. But it's an aspirational period now, trying to move those Muppets beyond just that Sesame Street nook that people want to keep moving him into.
Why did he start wanting to have a TV show? That seems like very sudden. I know that he had proposals for it, but did he get reinvigorated to try to have a show from the Broadway thing kind of falling through? Or?
Well, I mean, you've got to remember, Jim Henson loves television more than anything else. That's why we have Muppets, is Jim wanted to work in TV. He didn't care what it was going to take. Muppets just happened to be his thing. So I think for Jim, the moment he gets into TV in high school and college, TV is where he wants to be. So I think he was always determined to have his own TV show no matter what. I mean, you got to remember, this is a guy that when he's a freshman in college, has his own nightly show. It's 5 minutes, but already has his own TV show. Jim loved TV. Broadway show's nice. That's all part of, again, making the Muppets more mainstream, showing people, Jim had no problem with the puppeteers being seen, for example. So that's Jim, really trying to push puppets out there and being like, hey, this is family entertainment. That's why he loved, I think, when they did the Nancy Sinatra shows in the 60s. But for Jim, the be all and end all, at least in this point in his career, is conquering TV. Once he conquers TV, then he's ready to move on to movies, of course. But to him, the end game of what he's been working for since 1954 is his own TV show.
What do you, I guess looking back, last week we discussed the Muppet Valentine show, which was sort of the first attempt at this version of a pilot for the new Muppet Show. Looking back on the Valentine show, it's kind of amazing how different Sex and Violence is from that in a lot of ways. And it sort of seems like very quickly they made this pivot of okay, that didn't work. Maybe holiday specials aren't the thing. Let's try this thing. And I guess, do you have any insight into sort of maybe what was going on, or what, maybe even personally, what you feel like doesn't work about something like the Valentine show?
Well, so Jim always thinks... He thinks in a very Jack Burns manner, in the sense that he thinks in vignettes. Even when he's writing shows in the 60s, it's all very sketch oriented. And I think that comes out of, Laugh-In being the biggest show on the planet at that time too, which is very quick paced. That's Sesame Street comes out of Laugh-In. It's that same mentality. So Jim tends to think that way at first, when it comes to the Muppet Show. And I think it really comes to fruition in not the Muppet Show, but actually in Sex and Violence. This is sort of like them doing that quick cut and everything. And I think that's when Jim realizes that's not going to quite work. We need to split the difference between what we did in the Valentine show, which is a little more deliberate, centered around a guest star. I think Jim figured out that like you need that guest star in there. I think the two misfires you see in Sex and Violence and in the Valentine special points him in the right direction for the format for the Muppet Show eventually. But I really think that they're still thinking vignette in sort of a vignette style. It's Jerry Joel who's the one who's always willing to tell Jim, sit back and think about those characters a little bit. And we see that happen more in season 2 than season 1 of the Muppet Show. But so you've got a lot of different influences sort of, being stirred into the pot of time. But I think Sex and Violence is, is that last gasp on let's get the sketch comedy down, which ends up, again, this is pre-Saturday Night Live, and Saturday Night Live does kind of go that way, although they slow things down a little bit. Laugh-In is still this bang, 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 like you were saying, Matt. You've got sketches that keep dropping in out of nowhere. Like the Swedish Chef comes in and then he's out and then he's in and he's out. And it's like, it's very disorienting. I think Jim finally got that. But I think that more deliberate pace of the Valentine show, and especially how that show sort of lands with a thud is, him trying to figure out, we slowed it down. Let's speed it up. Let's see what works. What's so fascinating and where we're very lucky with Jim is because this is in the 70s and TV shows aren't like, well, that didn't work, forget it, you're never coming back, which would probably happen today. They keep giving Jim the chance to come back and try again. So we're actually sort of seeing, which is kind of fun, we're seeing like, the mind and the minds at work on these, like figuring these things out. And that's even what's so great about the Muppet Show is like, even when you get to the first season, you're still watching them figuring these things out before you finally get to the second season and the ship is kind of righted at that point and really becomes a Muppet Show. So it's great to watch everybody at work on this. I think it's really fascinating to see a creative experimenting in public like this. So I think that's what's really great about even something like Sex and Violence, where you get done, you're like, well, that didn't work. But we're allowed to see that, which is really great.
That's one of my favorite things about this, like watching all this Muppet stuff, is seeing how much he like basically failed publicly, or like how often like Jimmy Dean show got canceled, and it just seems like, well, to a lot of people, that seems like that would be the end of his career, basically. Like, he will never recover from that. But yeah, like you're saying, it just was so different back then that he could like direct an episode of a TV show that everybody hated, but still somebody was like, hey, come try this thing. This will be all right.
And it's a great example of stick-to-itiveness on Jim's part. Mm-hmm. It's like, I mean, how many people fail with a pilot almost 3 times basically, and he just keeps coming back. And and again, fortunately, he's got the right guy. It's Jim's always about relationships and personnel. He's got the right guys in his corner. He's got Michael Eisner, who's like, Jim, we believe in you. And they just keep giving him the backing he needs, even as, like you're saying, he's sort of failing in public on this. And the flip side of that is when we get to the Jim Henson Hour and Jim's failing in public there, NBC's like, nope, we're done. We're pulling the plug on this. 20 years ago, that might not have been the fact.
That's one of the, I think, most eye-opening things that has happened as we've done this podcast, going all the way back to the Sam and Friends days and watching everything we can get our hands on between then and now on Sex and Violence, is seeing both those like evolutions that are happening as we get closer and closer to something that looks like the Muppet Show, and it's almost there but not quite. And then also seeing all of these things that are so far from the Muppet Show that, like, when we're talking about like the Tinker D stuff or the Hey Cinderella, like the Muppet Land specials, where it's just like, yeah, they were kind of throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks for a while there. And I think, yeah, you're absolutely right in that if nowadays somebody came out with a puppet TV show that nobody wanted to pick up, they're gonna the network's probably gonna say, yeah, you know what, puppets don't work, let's not do puppet shows. And it would just be like a blanket statement of like, let's never try that again.
Yeah, well, I mean, we saw it with the Dark Crystal revival. We go one season and Netflix like, okay, well, we're done with that. And and like the Hensons are ready to go, man. Like, let's give them a chance. I mean, it's one of those you got to give people that air in that space. Michael Frith talked about that, with the Muppet Show. He's like, I just, we had the luxury of it being 1976 and there was air in the schedule and we had time. And we don't have that now in the age of Netflix. You don't stick the landing in 8 or 13 episodes. You're done.
Yeah.
There's also just like the competition that's out there now of like people have 12 different streaming platforms with 1,000 different shows every month coming out. And so it's, like things are getting buried a lot faster. Whereas it's like, hey, we're willing to like air this weird pilot on a network on a prime time, like Sunday night, like enjoy.
There's 3 channels, so you got to watch this weird bullshit now.
It's so hard to make people understand that, because it's like, I mean, and you guys are younger than I am, so maybe you weren't around when there were really only 3 channels and that was all we had. Maybe you were at the tail end of that. But I mean, it's really, that is an important point, because like, if it was on, we watched it. I mean, that's why shows like, the $6 Million Man were hits. You're like, it's not a great show, but it's on. But I think what you were saying, Matt, I think is exactly right. You would think nowadays you've got millions of options. So you're like, that should make it really easy for stuff to get out there. Well, it kind of does, but it also makes it really easy for stuff to disappear in a hurry, because, you're kind of screaming into the void, and everybody's trying to look for that next big hit to break them out. And if they don't get it, they pull the plug.
I have a question that's not really related to specifically like sex and violence and what we're talking about today, but you've mentioned a few names that I think we've mentioned on this podcast multiple times, like Jerry Jewell and Michael Frith, and these people who are really important to the Henson like legacy, especially I'm thinking back to like even like Jane Henson, Don Saleen, especially these people who made huge strides in like helping the Muppets become what they became. Is there any one out of those, I mean, maybe you can't just pick one, that like you feel like never gets the credit they deserve, or is like sort of like an unsung hero of the Muppets?
Well, let me give you 2, because I think the first one that you absolutely always have to mention in Jim's story, and it was really important to me in writing this book, is Jane Henson. She's there day one. What I think is really, I'm going to digress a little bit, because what I think is really fascinating about the subjects I've written about, Jim Henson, George Lucas, Dr. Seuss, there's one really interesting, strong through line through all 3 of those, really creative, iconic American geniuses, is they all had in their lives brilliant women who they were married to, whose work they valued, whose opinion they craved, and judgment more than anybody else on the planet. Jane was the first person Jim would call after watching his own appearances on like The Tonight Show. George Lucas hands editing of Star Wars over to his wife because he knows she's brilliant. He doesn't have time. Dr. Seuss would bring first drafts of everything to his wife, Helen, have her read it. Absolutely sought her opinion on it. These really strong women who were there at the very beginning, who helped them found their companies, and who they all 3 ultimately lose through either intentional or sort of benign neglect. But, the role of Marsha Lucas, Jane Henson, Helen Palmer Geisel. I mean, you can't overstate the importance of these women. And in Jim Henson's case, it is absolutely Jane Henson, who stays with him the entire time, even as their own personal relationship is sort of fracturing. Jim constantly, time and again, is going back to Jane. What do you think? Even when he's going through the deal with Disney, Jane, what do you think? Let's talk about this. And, and they're like negotiating divorce at this point, and he's still bringing her in to talk Disney deal. So, the relationship, the brilliance of Jane Henson. Jane Henson is such a great puppeteer. This is one thing that stuns people. She's the one who taught Frank Oz how to perform. Oz told me the story of sitting there in the Muppet workshop in the first Muppet offices with a puppet on his arm in front of a mirror with Jane telling him, like walking him through for hours, the best way to lip sync. If you think Frank Oz is the greatest performer in the world, you can thank Jane Henson for that. So I think Jane is probably the first among peers for those that don't get enough credit. I think the other one that really deserves it, and again, there's so many. Again, Bernie Brillstein is very important. But David Laser. But I think the one that I would point to, and you mentioned as well, is Jerry Jewell, who was again one of the very first hires in Jim's company. God came in originally as a performer, and when you bring in Frank Oz as one of your next 2 hires, that was when Jerry's like, I got to figure something else out because I can't compete with this kid.
I don't know. We are big Tamanella Grinderfall fans here, so
wow, what a great deep cut there. Yeah,
Tales from Tinker D is like one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
Yeah, and
so much.
And that's Jerry Jewell, who knew it? It's like Dave Grohl, like he's an awesome drummer, but all of a sudden you put him in front, you're like, where did this come from? Yeah. Like Jerry Jewell, you bring him in as a performer, you're like, my God, this guy's a spectacular writer. And, and really is the one more than anybody, especially in Jim's lifetime, really understands character, really is devoted to character, and is like the one who's standing in the writer's room reading them the riot act that you can't ignore character. Character is king. Jim knew that intuitively. Jerry's the one that was going to say it in the room. And so I think that makes Jerry really important to the stories because he's the one, again, that Jim could keep going to. It's like, we got to write this. We got to write it in a hurry. Jerry was really fast. And even when he's on the West Coast, Jerry was using the early versions of like fax machines, sending scripts to Sesame Street, for example. Yeah. I mean, Jerry's hands are in an awful lot of things throughout Jim's career. But I really think that it's, especially with something like The Muppet Show or The Muppet Movie, even when Jerry's name isn't always on things, his hands are almost always on it. So I think he's really one of the big unsung heroes of the Henson and the Muppet story as well.
That was one big curiosity I had with Sex and Violence, is that his name is not on Sex and Violence. Did he have anything to do with it?
I don't think so. And I think that maybe it has something to do with with the Valentine's show not landing. They're like, okay, let's try something completely different. By the time you actually get to what is the Muppet Show, Jerry's back involved, but he's not the head writer, notice, that first season. Part of that had to do with the networks, and people saying, well, we need somebody who's done head writing on TV coming in the spring, and Jack Burns. And Jerry, to his credit, kept his mouth shut and bit his cheek and was like, Jim, I will come and I will write and I will be brilliant. And he was. But I think that's the reason why once Jerry's the head writer in season 2, that show starts to take off because Jack Burns, again, is very, very laugh-in-y, very vignette oriented. He's not, he's sort of, again, what's disorienting you, Matt? He's taking a lot of stuff and like just smacking it together and being like, we're going to go from sketch to sketch to sketch to sketch. And Jerry's like, we need like a story that's kind of like bringing this along and let's not have at the dance where we're just telling dumb jokes and we're not advancing anything. Let's scrap that. So that's where Jerry's hand comes into it. But yeah, you're right. He's absent from this. And what's interesting is, again, Jim brings in Marshall Brickman for this as the lead writer, who Jim has worked with in the past on this. I don't know the story of how they met, but Jim clearly admired his work. He'd written for Woody Allen. And if you're a fan of musicals, he actually wrote Jersey Boys, the musical, later. So like Marshall Brickman is legit, he's got game on this stuff. So he's a good writer to go to. And again, he and Jim had a relationship and had worked together. And for Jim, relationships always mattered. But I think this is, you called it a pivot at one point. I think that's what we're seeing with Sex and Violence is it's like, we don't think Valentine's show worked. Now they didn't take long enough. I mean, the window between Valentine's show and this is very short. I don't think they necessarily processed everything about what worked and what didn't work. They're like, okay, that didn't work. We're going to do something totally different. So like you just bring in a brand new creative team. And I think that's why you see Jerry sort of, he may have been involved a little bit, but he's primarily sidelined in this one.
I think one of the things in your book that amazed me the most about Sex and Violence is that you said that they had 3 months basically from green light to production.
Yeah, I think it was a May green light and a September show. Yeah, or something like that.
And the fact that they not only said like, okay, we can do this, but also said, and also let's make like 20 new characters. Mm-hmm. Like not just like what we've seen before this is they are willing to reuse puppets a lot. They bring back Gosh Posh and Featherstone and all these puppets that they just like, they're going to use across all these different ideas. And this is one where they're like, okay, we need a bunch of new characters. We only have a few months. Go.
Right. I mean, it's a big risk, both just time-wise, like can you build all these characters and design and build them all at that time? And then also you do run the risk of the audience tuning in and being like, we don't know who these are. And what's interesting is so many of those puppets who they built, I don't want to say on the fly, but like built very quickly and were just like, let's just get some new faces out there, turn out to be sort of a lot of the iconic Muppets now, who hadn't been in the Valentine's show. So it is interesting that, you had a very quick turnaround, but you do end up with so many sort of iconic characters there, even if they're not doing things exactly what we associate them doing much later, but you're seeing them all dropped in. Part of it has to do with the design work of Michael Frith, who's brought in. Michael Frith is brought in as Jim's creative director at this point. He's not a builder, and he's not even always necessarily a designer, but he's the guy who could sort of do like Don Saline did. You would hand him a sketch and like Michael Frith could like make it really pretty. If you go online and Google like Dr. Teeth, you'll see Michael's initial design for Dr. Teeth. It's gorgeous, and the puppet pretty much ends up looking like that, but that's the way Michael was able to think. He was able to think in 3D. He had actually worked for Dr. Seuss early in his career. He was one of Dr. Seuss's first editors, and is a really great artist as well. Ends up designing the Land of Gorge puppets as well. But anyway, so you had, I think again, it's perfect storm. You had a lot of these really talented people starting to come into the organization now. Who are able to get that turn. Bonnie Erickson's working in the workshop, and even Jim at that point, and Dave Goles is primarily a puppet builder at that time, not really a performer. But you've got Jim who's still doing it all, coming in at night and bring the puppets out and let's go through this and let's touch them and let's see, are they designing? And Bonnie Erickson even talks about how the Swedish Chef, for being a very simple puppet, was done at almost the last minute, and Jim came in and finished him up with her. So they were, it's like turning in your paper the night before it's due. I mean, they were like working down to the wire on this thing.
Yeah.
And that's what's so fascinating is that like some of these, like you mentioned, like some of these characters who go on to be mainstays of like these tentpole characters of the Muppets, like the Swedish Chef, are these sort of like last minute thrown together ideas sometimes that just like they had the great instincts to make this great thing. Like when we talked about the Great Santa Claus Switch, there was the story of Jim designing Gonzo in just a couple hours of just like taking some foam and being like, I don't know, a weird nose like this, stick him in a cigar box. That's good. And then now one of the top like 5 known Muppets that you have.
Yeah, and
designed in a couple hours.
And Swedish Chef actually, came out of, Jim had done that performance for the U.S. Department of Ag overseas at one point with Omar. It's almost the exact same setup. And I think Jim, again, when you're getting ready to put on a show and you've got a very quick turnaround, it's like, what was really funny? What was really funny was when we did the thing with Omar. Let's do that, and sort of like redesigning. And it's funny. There's not a lot there to the Swedish Chef. It's basically his head and then a shirt with him. But it was all about making sure you get it right and making sure you've got a character there automatically. But I do think that was Jim. Like, what are we going to do? Okay, we did Omar at USDA, and that was funny. Let's do a character like that as well.
Well, let's get into some of these segments from Muppet Show Sex and Violence and maybe talk through some of them of like what works, what doesn't work. I guess, yeah, like starting off, we have the show hosted by Nigel. Again, we've chosen, just like the Valentine show, to not have one of our familiar Kermit, Rolf. Like, we didn't have them hosting this thing. And I think, obviously, with the Muppet Show, they decide to go with Kermit as the host. But early on, it seems like Jim is sort of like rejecting the idea of having a known puppet be a host. So we get Nigel, who I think similar to it was Wally in the Valentine special, doesn't have a lot going on personality-wise. He's just sort of there to wrangle. So yeah, and then we see him most of the time sort of managing things backstage with Sam and Floyd as they're playing board games throughout, various board games of like Scrabble and chess, checkers, etc. I guess, what do you guys think of just the sort of the form of this, the layout with Nigel as a host?
I guess the main thing I thought the whole time was why? Where are they? Who are these people? I feel like there is not any connective tissue there that makes, I don't know, a lot of like intuitive sense. I liked those in-between segments more than I liked any of the skits, I think, just because they do have like character going on. Nigel is a confusing choice, but you can pretty easily just pretend that he's Kermit, and that kind of makes a little bit of sense. I really liked that. Like, I liked Sam Eagle in this because he's like kind of nice. He's like Nigel's best friend, and they're kind of like having a good time, which makes Sam a little bit more boring because like he doesn't have like that edge of being like an antagonist basically. But I like by the end of it, he's basically like just chilling with Floyd and Nigel having a good time. But mostly I just was very curious about where they were and what they were doing.
Yeah, let's talk about Nigel and the setup here, because this is what I think is really fascinating, especially as you're looking at the trajectory that gets us to the Muppet Show. Because even when they got ready to start writing the Muppet Show, they still really sat down to think about where the Muppet Show took place. And I think that's one of the disorienting parts even of the Valentine show is you're like, where is this? It looks like a greenhouse kind of, like, but there's no real. Yeah, it's a very strange setup, and you've got Wally hosting that. I never got a great answer. I put all the answers I got, but I never got what I thought was a great answer on why Jim was gun shy about using Kermit. Yeah. I think at one point even John Stone was like, well, Jim was trying to pull back from performing. Well, that doesn't answer the question, because he's performing both Nigel and Wally. He's at the center. Right. He's just not choosing. He's just not choosing the character well. And I don't know if there's a little bit of that, sting Jim got when he used Kermit, and the reviewers like, oh, there you go, bringing Kermit. He's poisoning Sesame Street because he's Jim was like, well, we're not going to put him at the front and center of anything right now because I don't want to have to deal with Jack Gold again. So I don't know if there was any of that going on as well either. But you clear, Jim liked Nigel, he always said, because he was a middle of the road character. And Jim's like, I'm a middle of the road character. And you're like, yeah, but Jim, but you're not boring. And Nigel is hugely boring. And it's a really odd decision. And fortunately, they don't give Nigel a lot to do. Like you were saying, he's kind of pushing things around more than anything else. And he's kind of good for Sam to bounce off of. But it's a really curious choice. And I think it is interesting that like once they're not using him anymore, they're like, just put him at the front of the orchestra. Like there's nothing else to do with this guy.
It's like Wally they just sent to the Phantom Zone. You just never see Wally ever again. And Wally is more. I think I like Wally less than I like Nigel. Wally kind of grated on me, but Nigel was like a nice, agreeable fellow.
Yeah, I mean he's very milquetoast. Like, and I've always asked people, I'm like, what is he? He's like an amphibian? Like, we don't know what he is. I mean, it's a Muppet.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to be anything. But it's like what people like when I was trying to describe him in the book, I was like, vaguely amphibious. Like I couldn't even
Looks like
describe
a
it.
newt, sort of, or something.
But I also think it's interesting. Let's look at the center. The three major, the ones who they're intending at this point to anchor the show. So your three performers this time are Jim, Oz, and Jerry Nelson. And you don't really get that in the Muppet Show, partly because Nelson wasn't around for the first season because of the health issues with his daughter. But so it's interesting to see Floyd at the center of this. You're not going to bring in Dr. Teeth because Jim performs Dr. Teeth. Dr. Teeth has the same problem Rolf has. But the representative of the Electric Mayhem at this point is Floyd. So it's kind of interesting to see Floyd, who's already sort of fully formed when we see him the first time. I mean, like Jerry Nelson, like stuck to that one anytime. So like Floyd looks the way we expect him to. I think it's interesting when you see Animal, who's like down in the dungeon on the bottom.
Dungeon, yeah.
But it's interesting that like our top three right now, it's like Henson, Oz, and Jerry Nelson right now. And we don't really have Richard Hunt playing much of a part, or I don't even think Hunt had been hired yet. Maybe, I can't remember.
I think he had maybe worked on some stuff behind the scenes more like as like an extra character, but I don't think he's had like a voiced character yet outside of like maybe a Frackle.
Yeah, and Goals, of course, is in the workshop. So this is his three primary performers. But it's interesting that like you're like, why is Floyd in front? Well, because this is the first time we've ever seen him. They're still figuring a lot of these things out. Anyway, it's fascinating to see Jerry front and center because that didn't happen with the Muppet Show necessarily. He became a really great utility man on this, but didn't have a lead character. Whereas here we see him with what they were intending to be a lead character. Even though Floyd's not the front man in the Mayhem, he was intended to be one of the front characters in this.
And I think that's something that also becomes apparent because I think in the credits you have Richard Hunt and Dave Goelz and John Lovelady, Fran Brill, and like Carly Wilcox, like some background characters that again aren't main characters that we get a lot from, but they're there in the background.
Yeah, and they're rating the Sesame Street performers at that point too. That's where Fran was.
For sure.
Like, yeah, they're calling all hands in. Yeah.
Yeah, like having Fran Brill voice Janice was like, a woman voicing Janice. That's surprising.
I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think the point is we were talking. I'm fascinated by the setup on this, and that was how we sort of got in. This was Nigel standing there, but I'm fascinated with the setup because again, you look at the setup for Muppet Valentines, which we don't know where it's taking place, and it was even when you were doing the summary, you're like, I can't quite tell what room this is. Is it a control room? Is it a conference room? Like, yeah. I mean, I think that's part of the problem you've got with this. Like, we don't know where this is. There's clocks on the wall, and again, I think we had that problem later, even with. Even in the 90s with the Jim Henson hour, we didn't quite know where that was taking place. Kermit's in a control room, but you're like, I don't know where this is. Muppet Show has that done perfectly. We know where we are. We know what's going on. We know what the agenda is. Here we don't have that. I mean, it's still them figuring that out.
Muppet Show set's one of the nicest sets. It's so homey and like glowing and dark red. I love that.
Yeah, and the setups even at a time when like that didn't exist even in the 70s. Like that was a throwback to the 30s and like vaudeville, which is even older than that. And yet there was something about it. There's enough of vaudeville in that tradition, and especially in American DNA, that we're like, oh yeah, I know where this is. This is an old theater. Yeah. We're putting on a show like we're doing. We all just sort of intrinsically got it. Whereas
Totally.
with this, we're like, I don't know where the hell we are. Is it a newsroom? Is this like the producer's booth? It's just, again, it's them struggling with that sense of place.
It almost feels like a Limbo or something like they're all dead or something like that.
Well, see, I think the Muppet Valentines really feels like Limbo. Like there's no walls there, and there's like plants hanging down. You're like, where the hell are they?
They're trying to write the show as it's airing, so it is like sort of like they're trying to find their purpose.
The thing that I don't think anybody thinks this is as interesting as I do, but in the Muppets Valentine show, behind very far stage right, if you turned the camera, you would have the background of the backstage of the Muppet Show. So there's like the balcony, and on the balcony there's doors that have stars on them, like that's where the guest star is supposed to come out of. That same staircase, it's like they're so close. They just need to go that way, and then they will have exactly the perfect thing that they're looking for. But nobody ever thinks that's cool.
I hadn't thought of it. Now that you put that in my head, I can't not see it.
I'm reading your book as we go along. So I'm like on Sex and Violence right now. Did somebody give Jim the idea for the vaudeville thing, or was that just something like, where did that idea come from?
That actually came out of the writing sessions for the Muppet Show. When they got the deal for the Muppet Show, they still didn't know what it was going to look like. They'd just been like Bernie Brillstein in particular, really been hustling. And when they, and then they got Lord Grade, who's like, well, okay, great, you can come do the Muppet Show. You have to do it in London, and great. Like they signed the deal and like didn't really know what the show looked like. Unlike some of the earlier versions of stuff, Jim didn't have a trunk novel, going on where like, let's put this one up now. I mean, so at that point he really kind of started over and brought in Jerry and, put his writers in a room, a hotel room, and was like, come up with what we're doing here. I'm going to go to London and go scout this site out. You guys sit here, and the writer, Jack Burns, who was the head, who was going to be, you guys sit here and figure this out. So they really threw this around. And even Jerry Joel said that when they came up with the vaudeville sort of setting, that they still weren't sure it was going to work. Jim was like, I like this one. Let's go with this. I think it'll work. Jerry even said at that time, he's like, we weren't quite sure that was going to work. And of course, what makes it work is it's the show within the show. I mean, to use the modern term, it's very meta. Before that word existed. But I mean, that's what really makes that work. You've got front stage and backstage, which is what makes it work great. Jim seemed to know somehow that was finally the setting, the setup that was going to work. But even Jerry and Jack Burns said, well, they just weren't quite sure yet, even that was going to work. But they had also made the decision at that time. I think Brian Henson tells the story. He never said who actually said it to Jim, but I think somebody at that time told Jim, the hell with this, just bring Kermit in the front. Like, well, what are you doing? You gotta just go to your go-to guy. Go to the guy who's like the middleman in all this, who everything revolves around. That's Kermit. Bring him in. Stop with this nonsense.
That's the feeling I get a lot of times reading your book. Is I just want to like reach in and shake him and be like, "Come on, man, just make the freaking Muppet Show."
One of the things I think that we've alluded to a little bit with the Sex and Violence special is that it's so sort of unstuck in its premise of like, yeah, they're putting on a show, but they don't necessarily seem worried about anything besides the 7 Deadly Sins pageant. Like all this other stuff is just kind of happening to them. And I think that's something that maybe feels like it works really well in the Muppet Show and isn't happening here, is that you get that frantic Kermit who's like so worried about what's going on stage next, or somebody's late for a performance, or like the show must go on. What are we going to do? Fozzie, get out on stage. Go, go, go. And I think that's missing so much from the overall like arc of this special. We don't have an idea that they're putting on a show. And even when we cut back to that newsroom vague space that they're in, they're playing board games and they're not really that concerned. And I think for me that also ends up hurting the big like payoff gag of the whole special, whereas we get to the very, very end, all of the 7 Deadly Sins have shown up, and then we're out of time. We don't have time to actually do the pageant that this whole thing was sort of building towards. It's funny, it works, but it also doesn't work as well as it could have if you had them scrambling a little bit more throughout and sort of like made it seem like they were like building up to this great show that was going to be amazing. We can't wait to see it, all this stuff. But they're sort of very passively like sitting there playing checkers, being like, oh, Lust, you're here. Cool. Oh, Greed. Hey, what's up? How's it going? And so I think like because there's not that sense of urgency and excitement, the joke doesn't land extremely well at the end.
Yeah, no, it makes me think of something modern that takes sort of that same mentality and actually sticks the landing. It's like watching What Up with Dad on Saturday Night Live. It's like, Lizzie Buckingham, we out of time.
Yes.
But it's like, they're constantly building to it, and then they keep getting distracted. That's actually kind of what Jim's going for with this, but doesn't do it very well, like you're saying. Like stuff comes in random, but it's like it really where like the epitome of it is What Up with Dad. Like you've got everything where all this random weird shit, pardon me, is going on. And where did all this stuff come from? Like that, I think is kind of what Jim was going for actually, and it took SNL another 30 years to get to that one.
And I think that shows like just like the simple formula that you can follow with that sort of thing that does make it work. Whereas again, like there's no like tension or pressure applied to this potentially not happening. Like even if we had like a mention or two of just like, oh, if they don't get here in time, we won't be able to put on the show, or it's going to be really close. Like it's just sort of like we'll do that when they all get here. It'll be fine.
Or if it seemed like any of the other things they were doing were actually like a show they were putting on. The Electric Mayhem playing is the only thing that they even acknowledge being like, here's the segment that we're producing for you, and everything else is just like there.
And I think that's where it like sort of shines best is when we get these segments that slow down a little bit and sort of get to be their own thing. I think the Electric Mayhem performance is one of the highlights. And then the weird flirting birds sketch, which is I think impressive. Like
that's great.
Like technically, because you have them against the black background, everyone's clearly wearing like all black suits, so you can't see them. I don't think it would work in like the days of HD. Like you probably see their outlines or something. But I think those two sketches for me highlight like, oh, this feels like the Muppet Show. You let it take its time. You let the joke play out. It has its own little arc as opposed to cutting from things so fast that we don't even get to appreciate the puppetry or like what's going on in the scene before we're on to something else.
Yeah, and then when you do get, you get something that's feels a lot like Koozebane with what you were calling the sort of nerd Muppets, but they're so creepy that you're almost like out of the moment on that one.
I don't even know what, like that is one of those where I think if I was to rewatch this special for a sixth time, I might skip that one. Like that's the one out of all of these that I could easily skip because I'm just like, nothing is happening here. But yeah, the Mount Rushmore sketches are ones that again, I think it's similar to the Muppet houses that we will get on the Muppet Show later on, where it's like there's like sort of one gag. But I think the Muppet houses work way better for me than the Mount Rushmore, because the Mount Rushmore gags aren't even all about the fact that they are Mount Rushmore.
Okay, I'm gonna be contrary on this one because I've seen other people talk about the Mount Rushmore and how they just suck and they're not funny and there's no jokes, and I think that's what makes them funny. I think that's what they're going for. The joke in the entire thing is that George Washington never gets the joke.
Yeah,
like that to me is what makes it funny, and it's Jim, and it's essentially in a way it's kind of like Pigs in Space. You've got like the four main characters, and then Jim's doing the dumb one so well as he always does. That to me is what makes those sketches funny. Like every people like they're just knock jokes. I'm like, yeah, but the fact that like George Washington, like you have the beat, and then George is like, I don't get it. I mean, that to me makes that funny, and I think it's just random enough that I think that's what tickled Jim about those as well. But I'm with you. I mean, again, it's like the houses. You're like, okay, this is interesting, but it's not driving character, again, I think the way that we want and expect. It's funny as a one-off, and you probably could have even used Mount Rushmore in the Muppet Show maybe once every 6 episodes instead of constantly.
Well, I think they worked better if they weren't in the middle of this chaos of everything else. If you weren't seeing like the wrestling sketches with the theater things and all these things like back to back to back, I think they work better. If you had them as short little things between longer sketches on the Muppet Show or Sesame Street or something, I think they totally work, because I agree that the George Washington never getting the joke is hilarious, especially when he tries to tell his own joke and it's just knock knock, who's there? George Washington.
That cracks my shit up. That wrestling skit, I hated. I never want to see any of that again. They didn't even move, really. It was just like they're like poking the puppets with a stick. Well,
I think that's one of the ones that also reveals sort of the limited cast of puppeteers they have, because you have this issue that you have across a lot of Muppet things. It's not like exclusive to this, but the crowd is a lot of just puppets on sticks, and no one's performing them, and they're just sitting there dead-faced and no life to them. Interestingly, during one of them, you see like reporter Kermit is ringside in his little trench coat. But yeah, I think that is one of those that only works at all because of the fast cutting format.
Right.
Because you have to show very quickly, like, hey, look, they're tied in a knot. Hey, look, he's stretching out his limbs. Hey, look at this. But if that goes on any longer, you're like, okay, but what's next?
And again, I think we're seeing this as the last gasp of that laugh-in mentality, which kind of starts, if you want to trace it all the way back, kind of starts with like Hard Day's Night, like that quick. And like Jim was very into that look. Like he does it for Timepiece, and that's like that kind of editing. Like Jim really liked that kind of stuff. But I think by the time you get to, 74, I think people are like, like we've been saying, I think people are kind of exhausted by that at this point. I think they were kind of like, let's slow down just a little bit. We've got Nixon in the White House and we're all a little stressed out. Can we just breathe a little bit? So I think like, and I think maybe they realized that for the Muppet Show. And as you were saying, Matt, things start to work better when you slow them down, and then you can drop in those random jokes like that. But I really think like this, like you don't see stuff that looks like this, that's paced like this again for quite a while until we get into MTV, which is not that far off at this point. But I really do think that this is sort of the last time they were like, yeah, you know what, the laugh-in quick cut, and even Sesame Street starts to change its pacing a little bit at this point. I think they're starting to realize that that's not quite working anymore.
Let's talk about maybe some of these other segments real quick. I think we have the Swedish Chef, which obviously makes a return. We see him forever. He's still doing things on Muppets now. It's basically the same sort of gimmick, but this is sort of the intro to the Swedish Chef. And yeah, I mean, again, similar to some of these other ones, not much really happens. Like, eventually the sandwich flies away and he shoots it out of the air. But the leading up to that joke, he's just kind of making a sandwich.
Yeah, pretty much.
But I do love, and I mentioned this in the book, and I can't pronounce it, but we actually at one point we get the chef's real name at one point, which translates into railway crossing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the chef is a one-note character that somehow works beautifully. And again, they do, you can't really say they figured out the character development of that because there's not a lot there, but there's just something about that that's so goofy that it works. And then the chef, for the most part, like actually works here, even though, as you said, they can't quite figure out the ending. But typical of Jim, if you don't know how something ends, you blow something up or have something eaten. So.
Yeah, I think the ending's fine. The whole trick with Swedish Chef is to watch his hands do crazy stuff, and you don't get any time to watch his hands do anything crazy.
We also have the return to Beneath the Planet of the Pigs, which is obviously very close to something like Pigs in Space. We even like pretty much have some very similar characters popping up because Dr. Nauga is pretty much Dr. Julius Strangepork, like a one-to-one, the same character. And we also have a sort of appearance of Miss Piggy in this. Obviously not quite the Frank Oz characterization that we'll get later on in the Muppet Show, but it is Miss Piggy. And yeah, we also have a king who sounds a lot like King Goshposh because it's sort of Jim Henson's Southern gentleman voice.
Yeah, and shades of Veterinarian's Hospital, too.
Yeah, but I think this is one where it feels like, again, this is one of those where very close to something you could easily see on the Muppet Show and it would not feel out of the ordinary.
Yeah, and as you were saying in the summary, I mean, it's a twofer because they're making fun of Gene Shalit, who I don't think anybody's going to know nowadays. But so they're making fun of Gene Shalit and Planet of the Apes. So it's like it's two jokes in one. But I'm so fascinated too. Like this is technically Piggy was a dancer on an earlier. I can't remember what she'd appeared in before. She was in one other show before this, Herb Albert, I think.
The Herb Albert.
Yeah, she was on Herb Albert, and she was on an episode of The Tonight Show where she was lip syncing.
We kind of consider this her first appearance, but it's like when you find out that Darkseid's first appearance is in an issue of like Jimmy Olsen, and he's like on a view screen, in the background. They're like, first appearance Darkseid, that makes this valuable. So it's like, so you can point to Sex and Violence as like historically significant because it's the first appearance of Miss Piggy in a way, but doesn't look like with the little beady pig eyes and so on. But and who's performing? I can't even remember who's performing her at this point because in the first seasons of the Muppet Show, they still didn't know whose hand they were going to put her on.
I believe Fran Brill. Yeah, I think Fran is doing all of the female characters. She's doing the receptionist, Janice. She's the leafy green vegetables character, and Miss Piggy.
Yeah, because even in the first season of the Muppet Show, like Richard Hunt's doing her at one point, and it's like they just she's like I said, it's like the first appearance of Dark Show. Like we don't really know who Piggy is, and they didn't know either. But you're like, but there's the puppet. Like it's significant there because there she is, but that character isn't there yet.
We also have an appearance, first-time appearances of Statler and Waldorf in this special, who are much nearer to death than they ever seem.
Well. They seem quite ill.
They are like falling over in their lazy boys in their den that they're sitting in, and every time one of them is hacking up a lung or commenting on his near-death experience, or they're very unwell, and I understand why they switched them from these like dying old men to the hecklers in the balcony, because who's going to want to watch these dying old men every week?
Yeah, it's a weird kind of disturbing joke, in fact, and I'm not. I would love to know like how this played out in the writer's room on this one, where they're like, wouldn't it be funny if we had two dying guys at the club, like just talking about the old days? I'd like to hear how they pitch that.
And they're not commenting on anything happening with anything. They're just slowly dying.
Which again is like, I think, commenting on the writer's room, like, and like who looked at this and was like, aha, best joke, just two dying old men. Also saying worse jokes than any of the Mount Rushmore jokes or anything Fozzie's ever gonna say.
Not
like
to mention,
their jokes are terrible.
We have to do this if the show gets picked up, we have to do the same thing every week. Who's gonna want to watch these old guys every single week? Unless they were like building new, I don't know.
Well, and again, that's the kind of stuff that made Jerry Joel crazy. because you're not doing anything but just throwing out random jokes off the side of a Dixie cup. I mean, he just, you're not advancing character, you're not advancing story. You're just, that's why Jerry didn't ever like the At the Dance, which I think is also in here as well. Yeah. And even Theater of Things, it's all just like bang, 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 rat-a-tat, vaudeville-esque jokes. That made Jerry Nelson crazy. That's very Jack Burns-ish in a sense, but Marshall Brickman, of course, indulging in it here. And Jim liked setup and delivery. But again, when that's all you're doing and you're not really getting the character, which is what makes Muppets so awesome, is like they're awesome to look at and they're funny. You're kind of throwing away your shot on these.
That's making me think like how character-driven Sesame Street is and how interesting it is they didn't bring any of those lessons over to this wing of the Muppets.
Yeah, I mean, first episode of Sesame Street, Ernie and Bert, very first appearance, like Bert's in the tub and Ernie's bothering him. Bang, you got the character set up right away, immediately. They're not there to like tell you about wet or water. They're there to bug each other. It's like the setup immediately is in place.
I was so delighted he was in the tub in the very first appearance when we watched that.
You're like, okay, so we know immediately who these guys are. They haven't changed in 50 years, pretty much. They nailed it. Got it in one.
I love Jerry Jewell, but I'm going to disagree with him on the Theater of Things. I loved the Theater of Things. I wish that was something that had carried over to the Muppet Show more often.
Well, I mean, Theater of Things is
the Muppet Show.
Theater of Things is great. It's funny, but again, that's the kind of thing where Jerry's like, can we, let's not keep going back to this.
It did feel like the closest we get to, like, obviously At the Dance comes back in the Muppet Show, but Nigel's introduction of this is like the closest thing we get to when Kermit is introducing things of like, and now here's this thing. And we even see him in like a theater set with a curtain pulled back, which is obviously doesn't really line up with anything else that happens in this special, but it does line up with the Muppet Show. And then, we get the Theater of Things, which is just some pencils, and the new ruler of these pencils is
that was so funny.
A ruler.
Yeah. And I could see, like, if that was in the Muppet Show, all the pencils walking by Kermit at the end, and he, like...
walking off stage, back by Kermit. Well, nice appearance, guys. Yeah.
But the thing that does stick around from the special is the At the Dance segments, which we do see on the Muppet Show, which is, again, just a ballroom full of people dancing, just waiting to say their jokes, essentially. In a more broad At the Dance sense, how do you guys feel about the At the Dance segments, both here and on the Muppet Show later on?
Well, again, I mean, it's pulled straight out of that's the wall of jokes from Laugh-In, where like you would open the doors, and the difference even on Laugh-In is like you would open the door and you might get a surprising guest appearance, almost like Batman and Robin walking the wall, and here's Sammy Davis. But geez, how many weird obscure pop culture references can I throw in there? But again, I mean, it's sort of like Theater of Things. Like, it's funny, but when you've got 18 minutes with commercials, you need to move on, especially when you're trying to develop your character. So again, while I'm with you on it's funny, I'm also with Jerry Joel, who's like, let's not waste this. Like, if we're gonna have At the Dance, at least maybe we can have Kermit and Piggy dancing, and there's some interplay there, rather than throwing. Because even on the Muppet Show, they throw like it's characters you don't really know. When the At the Dance segments are funny, it's when you see like Rolf, dancing with somebody making a funny joke. But, when you see the janitor dancing, so it's not, you're just like, why? So, but, it's a funny segment. But again, you can see why eventually Jerry Joel tossed it.
We see exactly what you're talking about here, though. Like, we see some of these where two monsters are dancing together, and one's like, who does your hair? And the other one's like, who does your face? And it's like, all right, that's fine. He's fuzzy. I get it. But then we do have a couple of those sort of cameo appearances. We have Bert dancing with a woman who he's like, there's something familiar about you. And then the woman turns to the screen, looks vaguely Ernie-like, and does Ernie's laugh. And so we're supposed to believe that, like, Ernie, I think, has dressed in drag to trick Bert to dancing with him.
I don't think so. I think she's just looks like Ernie. But they should
have also has the same laugh.
Ernie.
Maybe it's Ernie's sister.
Yeah.
Could be.
But it's very odd because it's, like, almost implied that, like, this is Ernie, but he's also pink and looks nothing like Ernie.
Yeah.
So it's kind of weird. But I think my favorite of those is the Ralph one, because we have Ralph dancing and he's like, yeah, I was with Jimmy Dean, but no one remembers me anymore.
Oh, poor guy. Brian, I know that you are a big Ralph fan from Jimmy Dean. That Jimmy Dean stuff is my favorite Muppet stuff by like a mile. I love it so much.
It's fantastic, and we could do, maybe you guys have already done an hour on it at some point.
We have, and we were like hoping that like someday we will unearth a lot of those unavailable episodes of Jimmy Dean so that we can do a whole other few episodes about it, because we both just love it so much.
I was crying during some of them because they were so cute.
Not to derail the conversation to Jimmy Dean, but it's magical, and part of it is because Jimmy Dean 1000% believes in that character, which also makes it work, so even so much better. But the performances are just so great. And I always, and I think I was telling you this at one point, Matt, when I talk about Jim, I always show the segment with them performing when they've got the straw hats on to illustrate that, like, imagine the two of them, kneeling down behind the wall, and it's a live hand puppet where one, it's not the same hand doing everything, and like watching them fumble with the hat, and like the audience intuitively knows kind of what's going on. But like after Jimmy Dean puts his hat on Rolf, and then that hat comes up from behind the wall, like the place goes nuts because they know exactly what's happened. But that moment to me is like the epitome of Muppet performing. And it's like one of the great all-time moments to me in Muppet history.
Oh,
yeah, they do a
so
great
good.
job of sort of like living in the magic of Rolf being a real dog that is just friends with Jimmy Dean. But again, one of my favorite moments is also sort of a bloopery moment. We watched like every single available, which was like 40 different segments that we could find online for that. And one of my favorites is that they get thrown in jail. Both Ralph and Jimmy like go to jail. And Jimmy has like this quick change he's supposed to be doing into like a prison garb and totally like biffs it. He does not do it. And there's a moment where you see Ralph like laughing, but it's very clearly just Jim Henson's laugh. Because he is laughing at Jimmy Dean. Rolf is not laughing at Jimmy Dean. Jim Henson cannot keep a straight face. And it's one of the few times that sort of the puppeteer like breaks that fourth wall in the Jimmy Dean thing, which is interesting because a lot of those early Ed Sullivan appearances and Mike Douglas shows, they have them come out afterwards. It's like, here is Jim Henson and his Muppets. Let's interview Jim. Look, you see him with the puppet on his hand. But in the Jimmy Dean show, they really wanted people to like think of Rolf as a character.
I tell the story quite a bit too. So my grandmother and my mom, when she was younger, would watch the Jimmy Dean show, and apparently my grandmother could not figure out how Rolf worked.
Wow.
She was fascinated. She thought like it had to be a person in a suit. Like my mom said that like they would have these long conversations because my grandmother could just not figure out how Rolf worked.
I love those early appearances when a Muppet will come out and people in the audience lose their minds and they laugh so hard at all of the super corny jokes. And especially in Jimmy Dean, there's like children in the audience who are like, "Rolf, I love you."
You can see why Rolf was getting more fan mail than Jimmy Dean.
Yeah, man, it just seems like that was so much fun for everybody involved.
But that is a great joke at the dance, and it makes me wonder again, like, who wrote that one.
Well, we get that multiple times too. Like I think in the 30th anniversary special they do later on in the 80s, there's another thing of like Rolf commenting of like, "Yep, I used to be famous," and you just like, it's kind of funny because like that's the way we have started to feel as we've done this podcast of like, there's so many good opportunities to insert Rolf into some of these things they've been doing, and he's just not there. And I understand that like sometimes it's because Kermit is also there, but there's other times where I'm like, okay, take out Wally of the Valentine special and have Rolf host the Valentine special, and it's immediately better.
And you got a hell of a special. Yeah.
Well, and again, it's one of those things, when I talk about Jim, I'm always like, everybody name the first famous Muppet, and everyone says Miss Piggy, and then I put up the picture of Rolf. I mean, there's a reason that when they're doing the Sesame Street pitch reel, Rolf is like Kermit's even the sideman to Rolf in that. Rolf was the Muppet celebrity at that time.
Kermit doesn't even want to do Sesame Street. He hates Sesame Street.
He's like, that sounds like a dumb idea, and they're like, it's lots of money. He's like, oh, let's do it.
So yeah, it's hard to believe. I mean, Rolf fell in a hurry, so to speak, but because he was so famous that he's the one that when you're pitching Sesame Street to the executives, you put Rolf in it.
We mentioned a little bit earlier the Tonight Show appearance and how Kermit is very cranky on that and doesn't like Dr. Teeth, doesn't like the Electric Mayhem. He's mad that he only gets one lousy line in the Sex and Violence special. And oh boy, that one lousy line he does get is in the At the Dance special, where it's a little bit of a casting couch awkward moment. He's dancing with a woman. And he's like, I could get you a job on an educational children's show. And it's like, oh, so not only does Kermit only have one line, but it's also a skeezy line, which is something that will be avoided in the future.
Kermit gets away with being horny a lot, I think. Especially, he's always in love with everybody.
Yeah, but again, I think we've talked about this before, is that like often the female guest stars on Muppet Show are also kind of into Kermit. Like they're willing to call him handsome and flirt with him as
Give
well.
Him kisses, yeah.
So I think he gets away with it a little bit more, other than people like Pepe and Gonzo, who are just sort of like creepy sometimes.
Yeah, and I mentioned this in the book, and it's just me, theorizing on this. It does make me wonder if like Jim at that point, he had seen the special, if there was even part of him was like, yeah, I should have put Kermit as the front man on this. Like he's kind of being like, one lousy line. I should have given Kermit the rest of this. I don't know that, but it is a funny joke, but I'm just wondering if maybe he's like, yeah, we should have given Kermit more than one lousy line.
Yeah, the Tonight Show appearance is great though, because we get obviously the introduction of we obviously get the introduction of Dr. Teeth.
He
talking
didn't
about
go to medical school to be called Mr. Teeth.
Mr. Teeth.
My apologies to Doctor. But yeah, we obviously we in the clip we could find, we don't get to see the Electric Man performing on Tonight Show, but they did apparently perform the same song. I don't know if they just showed the clip from Sex and Violence or if they were actually there.
Oh,
It
cool.
kind of seemed like maybe it was just the clip. But yeah, we get Dr. Teeth referring to his music as catastrophe music.
Yeah, a really great appearance by Jim.
Yeah, this is one of those times where we've talked before about how like Jim Henson's improv skills are not always top tier. There are plenty of times like with Ralph on the Mike Douglas show and other times where someone will try to improv with him. And at a certain point, he just stops and goes like, I don't know what to say. Like he's like, I got nothing for you. But this is one of those where he's like sort of at the top of his game. I think having a new character probably helps that out a lot. He gets to make a weird like sort of sexual joke about like, dig that fuzz.
That fuzz, yeah.
Yeah, he's really, yeah, it's a really outstanding appearance by Jim on this. And like you were saying, I mean, he's not the improviser Oz is, but he's I think I even said something on Twitter about it. I was like, there are times when he could kill on the fly, and he kills on the fly on this one. It's a really
when
great
he's
appearance.
poking and prodding Kermit and like lifting up his pieces, and Kermit's like giving him the nasty looks. That was great.
But yeah, when he's poking and prodding Kermit, and like that's one of the most believable Kermit as a real character kind of moments, because you have Jim talking casually to Johnny Carson about how Kermit's made, and Kermit's just sitting there objecting
Like
and like
squinched
being
up face.
creeped out that he's made out of a coat and he's like all this stuff. One thing I thought was interesting about Johnny Carson, every time he interviews Jim or Kermit, he's like, I can't believe I'm talking to a dumb frog. Like every time he's amazed that he's talking to a puppet.
And he has that great line at one point, and I can't remember if it's in that appearance where he's like, I don't know where to look. Like, because you just, because that's the power of Jim and those performances is it's like you're immediately trying to talk to the puppet, but you're like, well, is that rude because Jim's right here? But Johnny's
Right.
like, I don't know where to look. I mean, that's the power.
It's
of
one
that
of those things where I
performance.
feel like the things that work best, we talked about this a little bit earlier too, is that like the performers who completely buy in, like Jimmy Dean, to these puppets are characters are the ones who work the best. And Johnny Carson is clearly one of those people who could not get quite over that hump of buying in. He's like, it's a felt, it's a puppet. I'm going to talk to it like it's a puppet and there's a human man underneath it. I'm not going to call Kermit a real person.
Well,
but he
I
does.
think part of it is Carson's like, well, Jim Henson's my guest, and he's, I mean, I think there's part of that like that reverence he's got for Jim. So he's like, it would be rude to just talk to Kermit. So he's like, keeps coming back to Jim, but like he can't, like Jimmy Dean, he can't hold his focus. Like that puppet immediately pulls the room.
Cool. Well, before we let you go, Brian, I have some sort of quick lightning round type questions of just like, we don't have to spend too much time discussing them, but we can just like see if you have an answer. If you don't have an answer to some of these, that's also fine. We can move on to the next one. But I just wanted to sort of see your thoughts on some of these. Do you have a favorite like early Jim Henson sketch?
Well, it depends on what you want to define as early. I mean, Phenomena has always been one of my absolute favorites in every iteration. In fact, the first iteration of it I ever saw would have been the one with Bip Bop Dada from Sesame Street. But I love Phenomena. And a lot of those early appearances, I hadn't seen until I started writing the book, and they sent me, DVDs full of Ed Sullivan appearances and stuff. I would say the Phenomena sketch, but as we talked about a little bit earlier, I absolutely love the Jimmy Dean sketches. And in particular, that one with them doing the straw hat dance. And it's such a charming moment. So I think if I had to point to a single, pre Sesame Street moment, even it would be that one. I just absolutely love that sketch.
If you were to rub a magic lamp and a lost piece of Muppet media could come back, what would it be?
The cheapest Muppet movie ever made.
Oh my gosh, that would be great.
And it's funny. I was talking with somebody about it the other day, and I went back and I was, sort of being like, oh, I don't think there was much beyond. I went back and looked in my folders, and I copied almost that entire script. So I did. I have read it. I haven't, or at least the big summaries of it. It would just be. And when I read, I have the book sitting right here. When I read my description of it in the book, I couldn't do it justice. It's so funny. And there's so much going on that's so clever. Like, part of how it's so cheap is they keep using the same street corner. and it's like, a street lamp with signposts on it, and they just keep going and redressing that, and they're like, now we're in Germany, and they redress it. Like now we're in Russia, and they redress it. Like, it's just there's so many great running gags in it. It's just, and then it culminates with like a volcano exploding because Gonzo blows all their money on the opening credits. And it's just, there's just so much great stuff going on. And it's one of those so tantalizing, disappointing moments because like they actually got very close to it a couple times, even after Jim died. And at one point I heard that Oz was attached to it. But like, that's just sitting there. Like, that's the one I would love for them, even post Jim to do. I would have loved for him to have been able to do it in his lifetime. Because I think it would have been a really good return to form, especially after the disappointment they kind of had with the Jim Henson Hour. But had that been like the first project he did for Disney, that would have been absolutely incredible. Yeah,
along those lines, obviously this is sort of like your dream project idea. If they could make this, obviously that'd be amazing. But I'm wondering, we've had recently Muppets Now, we've had the ABC Muppet series in 2015, both of which sort of like disappointed at different levels to different fan sections of the fandom. Some people love some of them, some people don't. The Muppets right now are not really at a peak as far as like creative output or even as far as like in the zeitgeist outside of Sesame Street, obviously. But do you have sort of like a dream project for the Muppets of what you think would sort of be best for them to do next?
I don't, because if I did, I would like lobby like hell to go run the Muppet Workshop. And from what I hear, like the new personnel they've got running things over there kind of get it and are trying to do some things now, which is probably, I think, why we're seeing like Muppet Haunted Mansion coming out and so on.
That's very exciting. I'm very excited. When that was announced, I was just like,
yeah,
what?
I'm very excited. I'm really excited about that too. I mean, the hard thing about the Muppets is it's like, it gets again to the Jerry Joel thing about, and Jim's the same way too. Like, character is king, so you have to be very careful about the setup on this. And I think I'm one of the few people who actually thought that the 2016 Muppets, like the one that was kind of like The Office, was starting to kind of work. Like, again,
I loved it.
It was kind of like with the first season of the actual Muppet Show, like they were starting to figure it out, and had they had more time, I think they might have gotten it there. And Bill Barrett is so goddamn funny in that thing. I mean, oh God, Pepe just crushes it every time in there.
Oh, when you get like drunk and hungover Pepe, like I understand that like that's getting away from like the kids friendly thing that people had an issue with, but I also loved it so much.
And sex is fluid, I mean, it's like, but I think from what I heard, like they were giving Bill Barrett a little more creative input, and so I think like you were starting to see that ship right itself. And had it been like Mike Fritz said, had this been 1976. Maybe we'd be in the 5th season of Muppets now, finally. Yeah. Because, it was them looking for, they're like, all right, in the 70s, the setup was like, we're putting on a show. So what's the equivalent of that now? So we're putting on a talk show. Because when that show starts to work is the moment that they're kind of like, what the hell with it? Everybody's in the studio.
It's literally like the last episode of that show is peak Muppets, and they just decide to like bring back Mana Mana and have everyone be a part of the show, and you're like, yes, this is setting up a perfect season 2.
Yeah, so when
that never gets to happen.
Like it starts when they bring that one runner in, like the new showrunner, whoever, and it's like they're like, okay, we need to bring everybody in to start doing stuff, and so now every Muppet is there for putting on the Miss Piggy show. Like, I still think you could have kept that setup and it would have worked because they finally brought everybody in. They were figuring it out. Mm-hmm. So it's getting to my point, which is like, you've got to figure out like what your setup is, because you can't just take Muppet, like the big parlor game we all play on Twitter right now is like, name a movie and then take everybody out and make them all Muppets except one person. What do you do? That's really fun. You have to really pick that project well. Because you actually can't, as funny as like some of these ideas are, you actually can't just take the Muppets and throw them into that scenario. I actually, the one I think was the funniest and would work best is like Muppet Murder on the Orient Express, because that particular piece is very character driven. Like, you've got 12 people, 12 suspects. They all have their own agenda. They're like, Muppets can work in that. You can't be like, well, let's do like the Muppet Great Gatsby. And it's like, well, there's not enough characters for that, like, you got to start jamming everybody. Like, they do it very well with Muppet Christmas Carol, because there's a lot of different characters that you can like be like, this Muppet fits this particular character. So this is my long roundabout way of saying, I don't know what you do, but they have to be very careful about that, because the character is what's driving the characters drive the setup can't drive the characters, or it's not going to work.
Do you have a least favorite Muppet thing that they have done?
I'm just going to stick mainly with like Jim's lifetime, because post Jim, I'm not as intimately familiar with a lot of it. Like, like Muppets from Space, I've seen like peripherally, and that's the easy one to shit on, and I would normally give that one as my answer. But just sticking with stuff in Jim's lifetime. Muppet fans have been very kind to me on this. They don't dunk on me too bad on this. I am not a fan of The Great Muppet Caper. And I wish I was, because it's the one that Jim directed. But as I've said before, it's a little too piggy centric for me. And I understand, like, she was it at that time. It's like, you take your big star and you make them the center of the feature. But like that whole movie, I'm like, really? Piggy's going to come in and save the day again on this?
She's the best at fighting.
So I understand. But anyway, so that's the one feature. Unfortunately, like when I came time when I was reading, I was like, oh god, I got to watch Muppet Caper. It's great, folks. I love Muppet Caper, but if I have to pick a least favorite project from that time, Muppet Caper rises to the top for me, unfortunately. And just because it's like I always would talk about like Boba Fett fetishes when it comes to Star Wars. Like, I'm not a Miss Piggy fetishist. It's just like when she's at the center, I'm like, oh god, let's just move on. Come on.
Oh, come on. I like Miss Piggy. I think she's hilarious.
and it's like, and Oz is brilliant. She's performed brilliant. I mean, the fact that Oz is so great is probably why I'm like, oh God, not Miss Piggy, because she, like, I'm not saying God Frank Oz again. I'm saying God Miss Piggy, because he's so good with her. He tells a great story about how real she was to people at the time, which again is why you're putting her front and center in Muppet Caper. But he talked about how like they would get calls from like, Vanity Fair magazine and like, Sports Illustrated. And they're like, we want to do like the swimsuit issue with Miss Piggy in it. And we think it would be super, super funny. Like, let's take it. We'll go down to the beach and we'll do a shoot with her, and like we can maybe film her running on the beach, and so like I think Oz is there, and I think Bonnie Erickson's there, and they're like, okay, so we need to bring our crew, and we'll have to dig. So we need to dig a trench on the beach, and they're like, why do you have to dig? They're like, Miss Piggy can't actually run. They're like, she's a puppet. It was like she was so convincing that they were like, we'll just hire Miss Piggy to come out and like run on the beach for us. And they're like, that is not even close to how this works, guys.
So kind of related to what would be a project that didn't get made that got made? Is there a piece of lost media that you really wish would just magically turn up?
Ooh, that's a great question. I would love to find out that somebody filmed the Nancy Sinatra Las Vegas shows.
Oh, that'd be great, yeah.
Which apparently she did, I thought. But it's just nothing has ever happened with the footage.
Right. So there's the media I would love to have magically appear, because that's where you're getting, I think Big Boss Man is in there, and because that was Jim experimenting with what he wanted to make his Broadway show. It was sort of his first draft of like, we need puppets that are big, that you can see from anywhere in the house. But there was also moments where Rolf, I think, would come out, and Jerry Nelson told great stories about having to come out and like set up Rolf's set in the dark, out there. And so I would love to see the footage of that live show with Nancy Sinatra.
Yeah. Okay, I have another question. Not necessarily about the Muppets, but more about writing a biography. So sometimes in your biography, and in every biography, there'll be like, it was a very hot day when Jim decided to do this. Do you like look up the weather on that day back then, or is that like artistic license, or how do you?
I look it up. If it's not, if I don't have the info. So here's the thing you need to know about biographers in particular. If you see a tidbit like that, it means we're so proud we had that information. So like the day Jim was born, in fact, I was in Leland, Mississippi, and like I had this guy who's just absolutely great, who worked at the newspaper, like brought me the old newspapers from when Jim was born. Awesome. But I asked him specifically, I said, don't give me the one from the day he was born, give me the one from the next day. Because I want to know I want to see the reporting on what the weather actually was, not what it was forecast to be. And to know what happened in Leland that day, you can't read the paper from the 24th. You have to read the paper from the 25th. Because the 24th has the news from the 23rd in it. So that was how I knew what the weather was in Leland days. I'd pulled those newspapers. So like I said, anytime you see a tidbit like that, it's biographers and nonfiction writers showing off, meaning like we got that little tidbit and we're so proud of it.
Amazing. That's what I hoped the answer.
So that's where I get all that. And so like, I can't refer to I know it's in the Dr. Seuss book at one point, like I talk about him coming out of a meeting into the rain, because I knew he had a meeting with, Bennett Cerf on a certain day. And I went to the New York Times and looked at the weather, and I know it would like poured rain all day. So, so you find moments like that, but But again, generally, sometimes you can overdo it. Like I had one, I'm not going to say the book, but I had another one. I had to throw the book across the room finally because like every page was like, and they went into the house that was white and had tulips planted in 3 beds in the front yard, and the front door was painted red and it had a door knocker on it shaped like a dragon. I'm like, no, I don't need you to download that. I'm impressed, but don't download. So.
Yeah, I'll name names because I'm not an author. I found that when I was reading Eric Larson's Devil in the White City a little bit, where I was like, do you actually know that though? And like, it's nice to hear that like he probably was doing that thing where he's like, no, I do know this, and I want you to know that I know this.
Yeah, we love to show off our research if we can. And in fact, that's the biggest problem you have is like as a biographer, and especially when you're buried in an archive, like everything is interesting. Like I when I was researching the book, I was staying at my agent's house in New York. And while I was there for 2 weeks, and I had photocopied a bunch of stuff, and like I had all this stuff about like a contest they were running in Washington D.C. for Salmon Friends and stuff. Mm-hmm. And Jonathan, my agent, looks at me, he's like, "What does that have to do with anything?" I'm like, "It's just cool, you know."
It's neat.
So it's not in the book, of course, but I like photocopied it because it was awesome. And I was telling Craig Shemin that story later because Craig's writing the Salmon Friends book, and that will be in Craig's book. But I was like, my response was just, "It's awesome," but yeah, I couldn't really use it. So that's the issue you run is like you just absolutely fall in love with your research, and it's kind of hard at times to tell what do you knock out, what doesn't. You know, you try to keep the mentality that like you only want what's in to advance the story, but there's so much stuff that helps lend it color as well. Like, you know, like I would always ask people this, you know, questions like, what, you know, when you went out to dinner with Jim, what did he order? So it's a moment in the book because everyone would always say the same thing. Everybody said the same thing. I don't remember, but I know we ordered dessert. So like so that right there is a great tidbit that helps you like understand Jim. So like of course you're going to use that. The other question I always ask people, and I've talked about this elsewhere too, is I would always say, how tall was Jim? And everyone would say, oh God, you know, 6'4", 6'6", maybe. And even Frank Oz is like, well, I'm 6'2", and Jim's taller than me, so Jim, he's maybe 6'4". And I always had a copy of his passport with me, and I hold up and it's like, Jim self-reports at 6'1". Oh. And everyone's like, that can't be right. And I was like, here's his 1958 passport, 6'1". I'm like, Jim's self-reporting. This is not before this is before he's famous. 6'1" right. Every single time.
He's not trying to be like a modest tall man.
Yeah. And everyone's like that. Everyone's like, that can't be right. He seems so much taller. And I was like, bingo, there it is. So those are the things you circle when you ask, you know, weirdly detailed minutia questions, because every once in a while you get something that's very revealing about that. I did ask people, you know, what did Jim listen to musically? And it was interesting how, you know, his musical tastes were very, very mellow. But they were also, I think, from sitting around the piano with his parents when he was a kid, like he had these, you know, like one of the examples I use in the book talking about the Muppet Show is like Jim would listen to Barry Manilow's album, which was a huge album at the time. It had like 4 top 10 hits or 4 top 40 hits. On the Muppet Show, Jim doesn't use any of those. He uses like Jumpstart Boogie off of it. Like his tastes were really interesting. They weren't expected. You know, he wasn't the kind, I think I said something like you would expect to be like in the beanbag with the headphones on, listening to like anthem rock. You know, I mean, first of all, he was in his 40s, but second of all, like that just wasn't it. Like Jim was very, very low key, very mellow. And
one of my favorite parts of the book was learning about the drug story. Because I think so many people looked at the Muppet performers in the 70s and are like, these guys are just all on drugs all the time. And like, yeah, sure, some of them were, but not Jim Henson. And that story you tell, I think it was he tried LSD once and was like, not for me.
So here's why I loved that, having a drug story, because it was like you're saying, Matt, I did run into like one of the first things people said to me when I told them I was writing about Jim Henson. They're like, oh, you got to find out about the drugs. Got to write about the drugs. So I was always looking for that drug story, because it's like your job as a biographer is to find the myths and either confirm them or debunk them. And so like I'm looking for the drug stories. And in the archives, there was a printed interview with somebody who's no longer with us. I can't remember who told the story, the drug story. And I was like, well, that's really interesting, but that's a reported conversation. So I need to find out more about this. And I was eventually able to find out who was in the room at the time for that. And so the last man standing was Frank Oz. So I asked Frank Oz, and he was like, oh, yeah. And like, there you go. Now here comes the information I need to confirm this story. Because I had seen it as a reported conversation several times, but like Oz had the goods on it. So then I was doubly happy, because I'm like, okay, great. Now I have my drug story. And what was so great about it as a drug story is it was the story where Jim's like, yeah, I don't really need to do drugs, which takes you like in a direction you don't expect, because I used it in the context of the SNL sketches, because everyone watching the SNL sketches is like, people doing that had to be on drugs. Well, you know what? They probably were, but Jim wasn't writing them. That was the Saturday Night Live writers, and they probably definitely were on drugs. But Jim's one time trying LSD, he's like, yeah. I mean, the conclusion I came to in the book is I was like, people took LSD to go to other worlds. Jim's already there; he didn't need it.
Mm.
Now, the one substance that Jim indulged in, and Jerry Nelson and Richard Hunt, was pot. Or as Jerry Nelson put it very delicately, a little grass, like he did the hand motion, a little grass.
Yeah, I feel like as many stories as like you hear about like the rumors of people speculating that the Muppet performers must have been on drugs, I feel like I hear just as many stories that are like from Jerry Nelson about smoking weed.
Well, the one who was like really, really noted for it, apart from Jerry, was Richard Hunt, because it was one of those when I was interviewing Oz, and Sinatra told me not to name drop it. I'll drop Frank Oz's name. Oz, I said something about, I was asking about the drugs, about the LSD story at that time, and I said something about drugs, and I was like, well, with the pot, I mean, Richard and Jerry, like, I was questioning, and Oz goes, duh. He was like, yeah, everybody knew that. But I think it was John Henson who just has this great story about how he thought Richard Hunt was just the coolest cat ever. And they were all on vacation together, and wherever Richard went, like Brian or John was like trailing along after him the whole time. And Jim apparently told Richard, he's like, Richard, you can smoke pot, but just don't do it on the boat with the kids. And so they would actually like go to dock and like park the boat so Richard could like walk up this hill to smoke pot. And so John was telling me stories, so like Richard would go and sit on the very top of this hill and smoke, and John was always like, I want to go up there with Richard. I want to go up there. And Jim was like, you know what? We need to leave Richard alone just for a little while. But I love that they would intentionally dock the boat so Richard could go smoke pot.
Oh man, all of those like boating stories always sound so great. Like all of these like trips of like Jim would just want to take people on vacation, and there's like even stories of like Jimmy Dean and Jim Henson out skiing together and all these things. And I'm just like, man, like that was like one of their go-to hangouts was like, we got the off season coming up. Let's get on a boat somewhere.
Yeah, well, and then remember, even before he died, as he was closing the Disney deal, he goes to Bernie Brillstein and he's like, let's put together a yacht trip, and the directions were get people who are fun. I mean, he was ready to like kick ass on this thing. He's like, get people who are fun, and let's rent a yacht, and let's go out and just have a blast and celebrate. He loved. Heather Henson was so funny because she said something about how Jim was, she's like, in most ways he was so simple, but when it came to vacations, he was completely over the top. I mean, who's going hot air ballooning in the Alps, for crying out loud?
I do love learning the ways that, like, obviously this very rich man decided to spend his money, whether it was like cool vacations for his family or some cars that are like the first thing he spends money on is super nice cars.
Blew me away. I did not expect that.
And it's funny. I mean, he was a gearhead in a sense. I don't know that he could actually fix a car. I never explored that further, but like he definitely loved it. He wasn't like George Lucas could take a car apart and fix it. I don't know that Jim could do that, but Jim did love his nice cars.
Well, thank you so much, Brian, for giving
thank you
us
guys.
So much of your time.
This has been awesome. Thank you for your patience in setting this up. I'm glad we can make it happen.
Yeah, you are welcome back anytime. You want to chat about Muppets? we would gladly have you back.
Matt's going to replace me with you.
Yeah, this has been great, guys. Thank you.
Obviously, we've recommended it dozens of times already on this podcast, but go pick up Brian's book, Jim Henson. It is everything that you want from learning more about Jim Henson. Obviously, another huge thank you to Brian J. Jones for joining us and giving us so much of his time today. But we got to get to our Muppet of the Week here, Sam. We already talked about him quite a bit already on this episode, but it is Mr. Dr. Teeth.
How dare you?
So yeah, we have Dr. Teeth, who is the leader of the Electric Mayhem, I guess. You could call him that. He seems like he's in charge.
His mouth is on the drum set.
It is Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem at times. Other time it is just the Electric Mayhem. But he does seem to be the wrangler of the crew.
Brian did mention that, Mr. J. Jones did mention that Floyd seemed to be more the spokesperson than usual. I do feel like, especially from the Muppet movie, I kind of get the impression that Floyd does a little bit more of the talking, or is maybe a little more friendly than Dr. Teeth. Because I do think of Floyd as a more forward character than Dr. Teeth. I
think Dr. Teeth is maybe, he sees himself as the leader, the man in charge, but Floyd's the one who gets shit done.
Yeah.
Like,
yes.
Floyd has to be there to filter the Dr. Teeth ideas and go, yeah, sounds great, Dr. Teeth. And then he goes to the rest of the band and says like, don't listen to him. This is what this is what we're actually going to do. That's, yeah.
And he's the boss of Animal, so he's got a lot of stake in that band as well.
Mm-hmm. We'll probably give Floyd and the rest of the Electric Mayhem their due on this podcast. Probably everyone except Lips will probably have their own Muppet of the Week segment because there's not much to say about Lips.
Lips exists.
Done. Check. We did it. And usually I describe the way the Muppet looks if you're not familiar with them. So Dr. Teeth kind of looks like a dude, but he's got green skin. He's got reddish orange hair and beard, little half moon sunglasses, and he's very inspired by the 70s fashion of Elton John and even more so Dr. John, the musician who he was like almost identically based on. But there's definitely elements of some Elton John fashion in there as well.
Not really Elton John attitude though.
No, not at all. Much more, he sounds and acts a lot like Dr. John.
Yeah.
If you look up Dr. John and watch some videos of him talking and performing, you're like, yep, that's Dr. Teeth. Dr. Teeth also has one gold tooth in the front, hence his name. But he's also said that he got his name because he never had a cavity. There's also been the mixed stories about how he got his tooth. In what we watched this week on The Tonight Show, he says he melted down 3 gold records to make that tooth. But then I think on the ABC Muppet Show, he says that he got it from a voodoo princess named Tiana in Tupelo, Mississippi.
It's possibly a magic golden tooth.
Ooh, I like that. Another thing about Dr. Teeth's appearance is that he sometimes has rod puppet hands and other times he has live hands like a Cookie Monster or Rolf type puppet. And this seems to be based on whether or not they need him to play piano in a scene. Because if he's playing piano, Jim Henson's going to perform his head and do the voice, and then somebody else is going to be both hands so that they can play piano properly.
Does he switch back more than just this one time?
He does. He has a couple appearances, I believe, on The Muppet Show where he has some rod hands. And it's not a super common thing. I don't think they use them a lot. He is mostly a live hand puppet. But on The Tonight Show, obviously, Jim Henson's the only one there controlling him, so we see the rod hands. And I think we do see him again, like when he's not playing piano, he'll have some rod hands. We saw the debut of Dr. Teeth this week on The Tonight Show. That is his first appearance. And then his first bigger appearance is obviously in The Muppet Show, Sex and Violence. But those were back-to-back nights. So this was the debut on the national stage of Dr. Teeth. And his performer at this time is Jim Henson. And he would continue to perform him from 1975 through 1990 when he died. And then for a long time, Dr. Teeth was not really used. They kind of were like, we don't really know what to do with this guy. Maybe we'll just have him around. John Kennedy, who is mostly an assistant puppeteer on a lot of things. He is sort of the literal right-hand man on a lot of puppets on Sesame Street and the Muppets work, was doing his voice for a while in some of the Muppet video games that were coming out, and also did his voice for the walk-around Dr. Teeth that they had at Disney World and Disneyland in the early 90s.
What do you mean? Did his voice?
So I think they pre-recorded everything for the Disneyland shows because they had, which I hope we watch sometime for this podcast, they had an appearance in 91 or something like that where they had walk-around versions of the Electric Mayhem puppets that would put on a little concert at Disneyland.
But they were big people?
Yeah, they were mascot-sized costumes,
Okay.
not actual puppets. And he apparently did the voice for that as well. And then in 2005, I believe with the Muppets Wizard of Oz is when Bill Barretta, who is also the voice of Pepe and a bunch of other characters, took over Dr. Teeth and has been doing him ever since. As far as family goes, I know we like to talk about family members on here. Dr. Teeth doesn't have any that we know of. I don't think he's ever referenced oh yeah, my sister or my aunt or whatever. Or if he has, It has not been that relevant to anything. So he doesn't have a mom that's him in a wig or anything.
But if we did see his mom, it would definitely be him in a wig.
Oh, absolutely. Just no top hat, but a curly gray wig. As far as a backstory goes, he doesn't have a ton, aside from what we see in the Muppet movie, which again, who knows if that's supposed to be
it's dubious.
The true story or anything. In the Muppet character encyclopedia, they actually say that Kermit's discovery of the band was dramatized in the Muppet movie. In real life, however, Kermit didn't find the band in a church, but at an all-night dry cleaners where Animal was being steamed and pressed.
I like that.
I don't know.
Who the hell made that up, though?
I mean, to be fair, I think a lot of stuff in the character encyclopedia book was made up for the character encyclopedia book.
That's weird.
So it may have been invented for that. I don't know if that comes up in any other media.
Yeah.
But I do like it as a backstory. But that church scene is one of my favorite scenes in the Muppet movie when we
it's
first get
great.
to meet the Electric
Yeah.
Mayhem. But what are your feelings on Dr. Teeth?
I like all of the Electric Mayhem generally. Animal can be a little overplayed, but I still like Animal as a character.
Yeah.
And Dr. Teeth, I don't know. I kind of like something about the fact that he's like kind of mysterious. You don't know his backstory as much, and he's like the front man of his band, but not really the front man of, like we talked about, like Floyd is more the front man when they're not playing music. So he's just got like an air of like weird, trashy sophistication, and I just think I love that he's so pompous and so like crudely driven by money. He's a really interesting character in that he's almost like a greedy bad guy, but also he's obviously like a nice dude. He just doesn't have he doesn't pretend like he's not interested in making lots of money. And I think the puppet looks really cool. I love this whole like all of these Muppets that just like sprung fully formed into this sex and violence thing, who are all like instantly memorable characters.
Yeah, that was one thing we didn't talk about a ton in our conversation about it, but I was really amazed at how many of these characters are just who they will continue to be for the next 40 years or whatever.
Yeah.
Because even though like Animal's living in a dungeon, he's pretty much still Animal. And
You should probably put Animal in a dungeon. That's a natural place for him to go.
yeah, I mean, he's usually chained up anyways, so clearly he broke that chain off of something, and it must have been that dungeon.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Sam Eagle and so many of the other characters are pretty much exactly who we're going to know them to be. And I know we talked about that in our very first episode when we were talking about the Muppet movie of like, how do they get to this point as far as characterization and all that stuff goes? And it's like, yeah, the Muppet Show will change some of them a little bit, but they're pretty much fully formed by this point. The worst things we can say about sex and violence are not really about any of our core Muppet like characters, aside from Statler and Waldorf, who are mostly dead.
Who are very, very distressing in this.
Yeah.
I didn't like that. And I'm glad for them that they started feeling better later in their lives.
Yeah. Got some pep in their step once they got their own private box at the theater.
Yeah. But yeah, I like Dr. Teeth quite a bit.
He's kind of an extension of Harry the Hipster in a certain way, where like he is that sort of Rolf-ish voice, but he's still cool, and you actually like believe he's cool, as opposed to like when we get like hipster Kermit, we're like, dude, stop. Like you're not, it's not working.
You're a nerd.
Like
Kermit.
Dr. Teeth,
Don't
you
do this.
feel like is one of the few Muppets who you don't feel as cool as Dr. Teeth.
And Harry the Hipster, I think, also had kind of that phony angle every now and then, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
Where he was a little bit more like, well, I'll do this meat commercial, but I'm not going to like it, but also secretly I'm going to like the big sack of money I get when it's all over. But so I give Dr. Teeth 4 stars, I think. I don't know why I wouldn't give him 5 stars. He just, there's not enough there with him maybe to give him 5 stars.
I guess out of my scale of 60, I feel like Dr. Teeth's going to go pretty high on that list because he's, again, especially like visually, his design, I absolutely love.
Oh,
And
he
I've
looks
got-
great. Yeah.
I've got like nothing bad to say about his character really either. So let's see, out of 60, let's give him a solid 54.
Oh, boy. Congratulations, Dr. Teeth. You're on the Muppet Hot list.
Yeah. I don't know. We don't really keep track of our rankings here, but I think you're near the top of my list.
I think you're one of the highest rated so far, for sure.
So, besides all the Muppet things we watched this week, I'm assuming you probably watched some other stuff, Sam. So, what non-Muppet things did you consume this week?
I watched Luca,
Oh,
and I think we talked about Luca already.
maybe. Did we?
Full disclosure, it's been a couple weeks since we recorded the Valentine's Day episode, and
Yeah.
my mind has been erased completely. I'm pretty sure you mentioned it last time.
I think I had watched it. Maybe you had not. I think is what
Yeah.
happened. That sounds
Yeah,
right.
so I hadn't watched it when you talked about it, definitely. I really liked it a lot.
Nice.
I am not a huge Pixar fan generally. I think probably this is the same exact thing I said last time. I like the first 2 Toy Stories. I like Cars. I like The Good Dinosaur. I like the 2 Monsters Inc.'s okay, but like once you get past those, I'm not crazy about like WALL-E and stuff.
Mhm.
But this like looked great and had a cute little story that was like easy to follow and wasn't too much of a stretch. Like sometimes I feel like Pixar can be a little bit like, what was the D&D one? I'm sure we talked about the same thing too.
Oh, Onward.
Yes, I was expecting it to be a little bit more like Onward.
And
where it's
thankfully, it was not.
There's no subtlety to Onward.
Yeah.
But Luca is full of like beautiful little moments and like great symbolism and just like lots of dreaming and very like realistic childhood kind of depictions. And I really loved it a lot. And the animation style was really like a cool departure from what they usually do. That's the only thing I can remember that I watched. Still watching Loki, and that's pretty much the only thing that we've been watching. But I would highly recommend Luca. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, the main thing I've been watching that's non-Muppety has been the sitcom Superstore, which is fine. Like, it's all right. It still continues to be okay. I watch it when I'm doing my workouts, and it's a perfect TV show to kind of pay attention to for most of it.
It's basically completely harmless.
Yes, and it's fine, and it's one of those that I'm just kind of getting through and not hating, so I'm good with that. And the other thing that is kind of a cop-out because it's totally Muppet-related, but I wanted to recommend it here on the podcast, is another podcast. And that is Matt Vogel's Below the Frame podcast. I have gone back and listened to all the episodes of that. Matt Vogel is the performer behind Big Bird, Kermit, The Count, Floyd, Robin, everyone now. He pretty much took over for everyone. But his podcast is extremely good, and I think there's a lot of things on there that we sort of speculate about that we don't know, about like the insides of how certain puppets work and all these things that they really get into on that podcast. I would in particular recommend the episodes with Tyler Bunch and Peter Linz. There's also a very good episode with two of the Sesame Street puppet wranglers, Michelle Hickey and Laura McLean. And they go into a lot of details of like how the Big Bird puppet works and how they like take it apart when they need to travel with it and how many pieces it breaks down into. And there's just like a lot of really good behind the scenes info in that one. Specifically in the Tyler Bunch episode, I've already told Sam about this off mic, but there's some Thog knowledge that we get into that is a little distressing in parts, but also he answers the question that we talked about of how Thog became so much larger in the Muppets 2011 movie. And it seems like the part that was true is that they didn't have a lot of great reference material to go off of. And then what happened was the guy who was designing the new patterns for Thog, designing it, did find some images and used a projector to like project an image of Thog up onto a wall and then trace Thog out at what he believed was like life size so that he could create a pattern for Thog. And along the way, the angle of the wall or the image or whatever, something happened, and that's how he came to be 2 to 3 feet taller than he was previously.
What? That's ridiculous.
I agree, but that's the story from the Thog's mouth.
I guess they must not have been able to watch like the Julie Andrews thing, because you could look up how tall Julie Andrews is and then extrapolate
you would think so.
from there.
But yes, that it comes straight from Tyler Bunch, the man who played Thog in the 2011 Muppets movie. So he talks about his experience of not being able to walk through the archways and all that stuff. So
I don't not believe him at all, but I think this is a ridiculous story. There was many ways they could have solved this problem.
Yeah, it seems odd that like if we can find these photos of Thog, I believe the Henson Archives would have to have some original like on-set photos of Thog.
Yeah, he's in every opening of every episode of the Muppet Show.
Yeah.
So it seems pretty easy to me.
But the cursed part of that episode is how at one point Matt Vogel asks Tyler Bunch, "How did you get into that thing? It's such a big costume." And he reveals that they had a hole in the costume between Thog's legs that he would crawl up into. And on set, they referred to it as the Thog-gina.
I hate that so much.
It's hateable.
What a horrible, horrible Muppet he is. He's a nasty, nasty guy.
Yeah, so just remember that when you're watching the 2011 Muppets movie, that there is a Thog-gina.
No.
I would just, again, recommend all of those episodes of Matt Vogel's podcast. He has lots of Sesame Street and Muppet performers on to talk about what they do. And it seems like a podcast that is made by people who are having a lot of fun making a podcast. The one thing I wish would happen on that podcast that hasn't yet is I want Matt Vogel to do an episode where he like interviews himself or somebody else interviews him. Because he doesn't talk a lot about himself. And I want to know about Matt Vogel and about Kermit and about Big Bird.
He's probably got a lot going on, yeah.
Yeah. And so that's just, I want to get more into his puppeteering life.
Hell, let's do it. We'll take the job.
Yes, we are volunteering. We will, I'm kind of busy, but if you need me to co-host Below the Frame, Matt Vogel, we can step in and make that sacrifice.
Well, what do you mean just you? I want to come too.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying like we can do this. You made it sound like they were knocking down our door to get us to come host this podcast.
Well, as far as the audience knows.
Oh yeah, we're super famous.
Yeah.
So in next week's episode, we are going to be finishing off the rest of 1975 with 2 more Julie Andrews specials.
Why?
I think this is somewhat similar to the other Julie Andrews special where the Muppets are not a main character throughout the whole thing. So we're going to do 2 of those together. And then there was a bunch of Muppet TV appearances throughout 1975. Some we can find and talk about, other ones that are just lost to the universe here. And then, the one thing just to mention real quick is that in 1975 is when the Muppets start appearing on SNL with their Land of Gorch segments, but we are going to devote an entire episode to Land of Gorch later on. So we are not going to be talking about that part of 1975, but just everything else 1975 we'll be talking about next week. You can find us tweeting out that playlist and the things you can watch over on Twitter at CommitmentPod. I also want to mention that you can follow our guest, Brian J. Jones, on Twitter, and that's just at Brian J. Jones. Want to thank our friend Tuna for creating the music for this podcast and Cassie Wilson for singing our theme song. If you have any Muppet memories or cool things you want to share with us that don't fit in a tweet, please email us at mail@commitment.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at Matthew Gatos.
And I'm at Slam Schultz.
And as always, keep believing.
Keep pretending.